The pitter-patter of rain can certainly be comforting on a dark night whilst trying to fall asleep. But it can also be used as a smokescreen for those out to get you. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Just before I begin, I would like to explain something for American listeners about the British system. A council, here in England, is a localised authority in charge of housing, education, waste disposal, that kind of thing. Council tenants are, usually, low-income renting low-cost property from said council. This story isn't about the tenants, but the council itself. One of the council admin buildings, in this particular city, is an old Victorian tower block, converted into offices. Converted badly, may I add. Most of the offices are open plan, sectioned off into departments, with those ubiquitous separator panels, and there's a general air of boredom. The contractor met me at the building and showed me the job, which needed to be completed at night, after both day and evening shifts had finished. The reason being that the room was being decorated with the smoking room, where all the council workers skulked off for their cancer stick fix. The room is on one of the topmost floors, tucked away along a narrow corridor and the refectory. The corridor sort of slopes upwards, as though the architects didn't quite think about how they were going to incorporate this bit of the general layout of the modern offices. Anyway, it's a strange part of the building. The floor starts to slope up and turns a couple of corners, past some old toilets, and then past an old arched window, narrow and small enough to be a glazed arrow loop. It's grimy and covered in dead flies and cobwebs. This is a precursor to the ancient door, original to the building, covered in peeling brown paint, with the consistency of dead skin. There's very little light here, except from what's oozing through the ochre-coloured glass of the window. So this is one creepy little stretch of corridor. I'll just add here that in Britain at least, smoking rooms are pretty much a thing of the past. If you want to smoke these days, you have to go outside on your lunch break and puff away in the cold. This was around 10 years ago. So back to the story. The door opens on a small cramped room with strange angles where a previously oddly shaped space had been incorporated into a more modern square. There are a couple of small windows up near the ceiling, but too high to see out of, and it's a Velux skylight showing nothing but the night sky. A threadbare blue carpet has been thrown haphazard fashion on the floor, so some edges don't reach the wall, and others rock around where there's too much room for the wall. And all around the outside edge of the room are a variety of chairs of all shapes and sizes, thrones for the smokers to occupy, I assume. The ceiling is a metal fabrication with polystyrene tiles and has seen better days. Some of the tiles are missing, others are broken and hanging outside the metal frame. Everything, and I mean everything, is covered in gross yellow nicotine. The chairs, the walls, the ceiling tiles, the inside of the door handle, everything. The contractor helps me get my tools into place and deposits a bucket, a sponge, and several bottles of cheap bleach. My task, to clean the nicotine, then paint the room. He leaves and I'm alone, in this little nook of a room, atop of an old Victorian building in the middle of the night, with floors and floors of empty office space below me, and not even the comfort of a security guard in the foyer. I have a key code for the front door, if I want to go out or need to get back in. I can't really convey how eerily creepy this job was. I had to replenish the water in my bleach bucket regularly, which required a hike to the toilets one floor down, through this partially lit refectory. Going wasn't so bad, but coming back, past along the gloomy passage, past the arched windows with its graveyard of flies, and then into the peeling flesh door, was a horrible experience. Actually, opening the door and going into the room of nicotine, with its circle of chairs staring into nothing at the middle of the room, and its black eye skylight, its crumbling polystyrene tiles, was worse. I tried to kill the atmosphere by putting on radio, which was okay when I was beavering away at the room. But when I had to go get more water and was approaching the peeling paint of the door, it sounded too much like somebody else was in the room, murmuring away to themselves, and I had to switch it off. About 3 in the morning, I'm starting to flag. I've prepped for this job in no way, and had just intended to stay up all night then sleep all next day. I've already been awake for one full day, so the leaden weight of tiredness is dragging me down. I've always put what happened from then on down to the weariness and an overwhelming urge to crash in one of those chairs and fall asleep. So it's about 3 AM, and I decide to break the monotony by having some sandwiches. I dump my bleach-soaked rag in the bucket, water so thick with nicotine, it's almost like a brown sludge. I grab my packed lunch and head down the refectory. I eat my lunch in silence, watching the flickering fluorescent light at the end of the room as it throws the shadows of vending machines up and down the wall. An empty office space like this takes on a strange atmosphere at night. Night security guards will probably get what I mean. You feel suddenly like it's not just the building that's empty, but the world. Like you're in some kind of void emptied of its original purpose and kept it in its original state, only to convince you, the one observer there, that this is not some alternate dimension of loneliness, but an office awaiting the arrival of the next shift. Time also takes strange forms. The next shift is due to start in only a few hours' time, but it feels like it may never start. Like this place will always just be empty and pointless, with its flickering bulb and sullen silence. So, having a snack doesn't help much. In fact, it's depressing. I feel oddly hollow, and send my girlfriend a text in an attempt to make some human contact. I feel like an idiot as soon as I hit send. The contractor was only here a few hours ago, and before that, I spent my whole day out and about surrounded by people. But it's as if none of that happened, or it happened a long time ago. And it feels like I've been locked in this limbo of a waiting building for months. Back to the nicotine room, and back to the job. It's 3:30 in the morning. I moved around to the other side of the room where it's darker. The one bowl doesn't reach over here, so I plug in a lamp and point it in the corner. I catch movement in the periphery of my eye above my head. I glance up and see someone standing outside the skylight, white legs and boots, but the face fade to nothing, disembodied and sort of floating. I back up terrified and watch the legs walk away. I take a few seconds before I realize all I've seen is the reflection of my own legs in the glass, illuminated by the lamp. I feel stupid, but jumpy as hell. I can't believe how much more I've still got to do in this room, and how many hours until I can quit. The place stinks of bleach, and I can feel nicotine seeping out of my pores. I just want to go home. So I do. I say screw it and go home. Down the empty building into the lift, to the foyer, which is lit but empty, and out of the door and into the cold night. The sound of sirens in the distance, the stars above, lights on the windows across the way. A sense of normality returns. I'm still really spooked, but feel a bit better. So I open the security gates to the car park, and I go sit in my car. I turn on the engine, but it doesn't start. It's a pretty old car prone to problems, so I'm not surprised, but my heart sinks. I turn the ignition on again, but now the starters labor and I can hear the battery is dying. I should stop, but I don't. I keep turning the ignition until the battery doesn't even respond anymore, and there's just a redundant click. The next bus won't run until about 7 or thereabouts, and I can't afford a taxi, and I don't have breakdown cover, and anyone who might usually help me out in a situation like this is tucked up asleep in bed, and I'm not about to wake them up to come to my rescue from my spooky room. So I go back to work, intending to catch the first bus when the service resumes. I'm actually beating myself up a bit by the time I get to the refectory for being such an idiot. What really is there to be nervous about? It's just a council office building. It's only the smoking room. It's just the night time, and everything seems weird at night. I'm mostly scaring myself here. I say to myself as I turn the corner to the refectory room and into the corridor, and then around the next corner, which is when I see movement. The next door to the old toilets is one of those fire doors with the sprung cantilever in a box above the doorframe. You walk through and it closes slowly behind you on its own. The door is in the process of closing. I freeze because there is only one possibility, that someone else is in the building with me. But why go into these old toilets? As far as I know, they don't even work. And where I wonder if some early bird council worker came to throw some water on their face or something. I remember that there's no water on tap in there. I'm aware at this point that I'm potentially the victim of a real life horror, and the last thing I should do is open the door and investigate. So, it's the first thing I do, obviously. The toilets are grim, modern but disused. The light doesn't even work, so I have to rely on the fluorescent glow coming from the corridor. There are cubicles, but who the hell would be going to the toilet in the pitch black? Hello? I say in a jovial way. Anyone in here? My voice sounds stupid and jaunty, like this kind of thing is totally routine for me. I stick the door open with a screwdriver underneath and venture in to check the cubicles. I know they're empty even as I'm checking, and they are. There's no one there. Back in the smoker's room, there's no one there either. If whoever it was had come back towards the refectory, I'd have passed them in the corridor. The place was, and I can only conclude still is, completely deserted. Suffice to say, I pack up my things and get the shitballs out of there, and I wind up walking the 10 miles home. Next day, I call the contractor and say the job is just too shitty, and I'm no good on night shifts. It's no big deal, I know, because it's a well-paid job and there are plenty of other subcontractors on his books who will gladly do it. And my dad helped me rescue my car that afternoon. I used to work in a nursing home that was built ages ago, and they still had the old part of the building at the back. One night shift, which was usually done by yourself, but this night there were 2 of us on, thank God. We were sitting on the balcony, looking over said old building, both having a smoke and a chat. Suddenly, the automatic doors behind us, which need a code to open. If that wasn't weird enough, we hear someone call out. I have to go to investigate, but find no one out of bed or in any pain, which is kind of common if people have a nightmare. So I go back outside to my staff member, and we again begin chatting, and not really thinking much of it. That's when shit gets real. The whole of the automatic doors fog over. The light in the old building in front of us begins to flutter on and off, and the curtains are flapping like mad on the inside. Both of us stood up, and huddled together, feeling our pants getting a little bit tighter. Then we see a shadow walk through the building, as in through the windows, from the start of the building to the end, and then hear a loud bang, which I guess was the door closing. All the lights turn off, and then the door begins to clear up. Although, yeah, it was pretty creepy, the creepiest thing that happened there that night was that we had 3 deaths, one of which we knew was going to happen, but the other 2 were a total shock. It's a horrible thing to say, but working with deaths you get pretty used to it. So yeah, put that in your no ghost pipe and smoke it. I'm an American living abroad, in a place with lots of natures and mountains, not far from my house. It's been a great past month of summer weather, and I've taken advantage of it by hiking every single day. Now the country I'm in is incredibly low-key, especially in the residential towns, so the illusion of safety remains. The mountains are just less than a mile away from our house. On this day, I was chatting with a friend in the US, and decided to go up to the mountain's base and loop back down. It's about 3 miles, but not as strenuous as hiking up the damn thing. So I'm chatting with her animatedly, and making my way up this sloped paved road to get to the base, and have a first unsettling encounter with a truck driver who tries to solicit me. I just gave him this look like, "Bye Felicia." This doesn't turn into anything, but I'm on my guard. I am by myself after all, and my husband is at work. I get to the base and I'm telling my friend about this creepy truck driver, and suddenly I have the urge to get out of plain sight. I'm at the mountain's base, which is to the left, and in front to the right of me, probably 1/8 of a mile away, is a parking lot. This mountain also has skiing in the winter, and is quite a popular place. Anyway, I get across the parking lot to the right, and enter the forest across from the mountain. I'm super thirsty, and the stream water on the edge of the forest is drinkable, so I start taking sips from my palm. Now this area of the forest is right by the parking lot, with a walking trail to get back down from the mountain base, but is still enclosed by lots of trees and shrubs, obscuring it from view of the public. There are also some people at the mountain, which is good. Anyway, I'm taking a break from drinking some water, still talking with my friend, when a different man enters the forest where I'm at, and he starts majorly, seriously, giving himself away from the moment he entered the forest. His body language, gaze, everything was off. Nope, not today, honey. I look him up and down. He's strong, in shape, wearing a white t-shirt, blue shorts, and has brown hair and eyes, with light skin, and is staring at me. But he doesn't approach me. Instead, he walks adjacent to me, crossing the path over the stream, and goes to the other side of the stream directly across from me. I don't hear what my friend is saying. I'm watching him. I notice then that this guy has a knife, like clear as day, just has a knife, as he leans up against a tree gripping the knife in his fist, and he stares at me, waiting to see what I'll do. I quickly decide that going deeper into the trail is a no-go. It seems like he's anticipated that I'm distracted, talking to my friend, and that I'll continue on my way. This isn't an option, because the trail doesn't lead to a road that cars can drive on for a good while. There's much fewer people on this trail too. I've seen enough horror movies. I suddenly realized that my uneasiness to get out of the mountain was probably because I was about to be pursued by the knife man, not just some sleep-deprived truck driver looking for a good time. I turn on my heel and sprint out the forest. Luckily, I see a car driving towards where I am. It's a mother teaching her daughter to drive, and it randomly started to downpour rain, and I look like a lunatic myself running towards them. I'm a 5'7" blonde girl, not a creep with a huge knife. I explained to them what has happened, and they let me into the car immediately, locked the door and called the police. After about 30 seconds, the man exits the enclosure and starts walking back in the direction of where I came from in the mountain's base. He's walking briskly and doesn't have a car of his own. The car I got into had tinted windows, so I don't think he knew I was in it. I tell the mother that that's the guy, but we don't want to provoke him, and he disappears quickly before the police arrive. I give the policeman a description, but I don't think they ever found him. Part of me now wants to believe nothing would have happened, but he did go really out of his way to make me feel uncomfortable. Everything about him was bad, and he was literally flashing his knife at me, sizing me up. It seems to me, anyway, that he knew I was foreign. I was on the phone and might not have noticed him. I looked like an easy target. But it's thanks to what I've heard in these stories that I'm more vigilant than ever, and squashed the situation before it escalated. A bit of advice for men. If you see a woman alone, leave her alone. Don't provoke her, even if you think it's funny. We don't ask for it. We want to enjoy our time out, without worrying we'll be apprehended by some creeps. I've had a couple of unsettling dreams and anxiety about the situation. Don't be the source of another person's nightmares. Freaky Knife Man, get a life, and let's not meet ever again. I work in a fairly busy hospital downtown, in the NICU. I usually work the night shift, and I kid you not, this happened to me less than 5 minutes ago. During orientation, we are taught to be observant of the signs of a possible abductor. We are taught to look for oversized clothing, bags, and shifty behavior. Luckily, I've never encountered a strange individual until now. It's currently 2:59 AM, and I've been sitting at the front desk since 11. I'm a nursing student, so I usually just do clerical work around the unit. I also watch the cameras to make sure no one is here that isn't supposed to be. It's usually pretty quiet at night. However, I've already had a sort of weird night, so this just adds the cherry on top. The NICU, and most of the second floor, is a locked unit, which means in order to gain entrance, you have to pick up a phone, which then rings to the desk. Usually it's parents waiting to see their babies, and family members who are lost. It quiets down around 11, so no one usually comes in or out during my shift, with of course the exception of housekeeping. One of the security cameras is situated so I can see who's picking up the first phone. I had been sitting here listening to stories when the phone rang. I glanced over at the phone, thinking it was a parent waiting for an update or something like that. It took me a second to register that it was the number for the first set of doors. I picked it up and looked over the screen. There was a lady in baggy clothing with a sling on her arm. I answered the door, and she said she wanted in to find her cousin, who apparently had been brought up from the emergency department. I asked for her last name, and she unintelligibly rambled off a Latino name that I only caught the first part of. Knowing that we did not have any new admissions, I told her we didn't have anyone by that name. I tried to get some information out of her, and she again said that her cousin had been brought up from the ED. I told her in that case she would want to go to labor and delivery and speak to them. She hesitated and said okay and walked away. I got a really weird feeling from her, so I checked the census to see if there was anyone that was being assessed in L&D, and there wasn't. So she was either at the wrong hospital, or she wanted into the unit to do something a bit more sinister than just see her cousin. I shrugged it off and figured that if her cousin was in L&D, that she would find her and all would be well. About 5 minutes later, the same lady appeared in extremely baggy clothing and her sling. The only difference at the time was that she was putting the sling on and was using her injured hand to mess with something in her oversized sweatshirt. She picked up the phone and once again asked to be let in to find her cousin, and the L&D had said that they had no one by that name. I told her the exact same thing, and that she would need to get in contact with her cousin and go over to L&D. She got hostile for a bit and then hung up the phone and left. Whether or not she was trying to get access to the unit for things that she shouldn't be doing, I'll never know. I was just a kid of 9 years old, and I certainly didn't believe in ghosts. I was raised in a strictly Christian household, and the closest thing to ghosts that my family believed in was demons. And it was a brand new house, just built, never lived in a brand new development. We moved in on Halloween night. It started out like the sort of things that you could explain away. Loud creaks, doors slamming by themselves, sudden drafts that didn't seem to have a source. Things you would expect in an old cliched horror house, sure, but not a new one like ours. Then, I was home alone all day, sitting at the family computer. A single footstep sounded down the hall, and then a few more, gradually getting closer. I assumed that my parents had come home, or my sister, or anyone, and I called out, but there was nothing. I grabbed the phone and ran over to our basement. After I called my mother, she confirmed that everyone was out, and that no one was supposed to be in the house but me. I convinced her that I must have imagined it, but I swear those footsteps were as plain as day. None of these things compare, though, to our basement. My younger sister and I played there, but unfinished levels had some faulty lighting, and the lights often flickered or went out. Whenever they did, we'd run upstairs quickly, but never without catching a glimpse of the man we called the Trenchcoat Man. A tall, shadowy man in what appeared to be a trenchcoat and hat, ducking behind some unfinished sheetrock. There were more stories. Friends who, unprompted, mentioned a similar-looking figure in the basement. One crisis involving a girl taped in a cabinet, and other things. But I was constantly trying to convince myself that I was only imagining it. I was a highly logical child. Everything to me had to be maths or science, and ghostly activities sounded like something my eyes invented or my brain mistook. My parents, Christian as they were uncomfortable when I brought it up, and as I got older, I tried to forget about it. Even now, more than a decade later though, I can remember it with perfect clarity, and my most vivid example of ghostly activity. I'd gone to fetch something from our basement, retrieved it, turned around, and walked towards the stairs, which were located next to a pile of junk, an old microwave, some books, and other things. The instant I turned around, I saw her. A woman with beautiful, shiny, long golden hair, sitting cross-legged atop our old microwave. She was smiling, looking at the opposite direction, and running her fingers through her hair. She was completely transparent. I stopped completely and stared. I blinked. I pressed my fingers on my eyes until I saw those flashing lights. I tilted my head to other angles, but alas, she was real. She was still there looking out our basement window, near the ceiling and flipping her hair. I could even read, through her, the piece of construction paper I'd taped up on the wall on the other side of her body. Whenever I look back on those memories and I think that I just must have been an imaginative kid, I remember that woman, and I realize that there absolutely had to be something I just couldn't explain. When I worked graveyard at a 24-hour porno store / strip club, on a night that I happened to fortunately not be working, there was an incident in the gay room. Basically, the details I gathered from people who were working at the time were that a big guy came in and went into the room. A few minutes pass, and another dude comes basically crawling and crying and screams he's raping people back there. Now, I worked with a plethora of jacked bouncers who literally feared nothing except that back room. Anyway, the bouncers all come up with the excuse not to go back in there and convinced a cashier friend of mine to do it. So he grabs the baseball bat we had behind the counter and adventures into what can only be described as a dark, teeming gay cavern of misdeeds. Now we are all afraid to get the police involved in this kind of shit, because it is illegal to have a gay room, which was definitely the place's biggest moneymaker. We didn't want the wrath of the cops, so we never got them involved. Anyway, he gets inside, and this big gentleman is wearing a gimp mask, and has all of the dudes there lined up, with no pants on, and he's just taking them one by one, leaving dudes bleeding and terrified. My cashier friend Dave walks in there and starts yelling at the dude like, "Dude, you can't be raping people back here." The guy starts sobbing, apologizing profusely, and runs out the store. The ambulance arrived shortly after and took a few of the guys to hospital. I hope those poor guys were okay. Until a few months ago, I spent almost 2 years working swing shift as a security guard for the university. Great job, great benefits, awful hours. 7 AM to 3 PM on a Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday 3 PM till 11 PM, and Thursday and Friday 11 PM to 7 AM. I was so lucky. I got the whole spectrum of shifts. Whilst this private university has a beautiful campus, it is a pretty undesirable neighbourhood, the red light district. There are also housing projects and a few shabbily run nursing homes. I saw my fair share of weird / creepy stuff, including naked old men, crackheads, homeless people wandering around in the middle of the night, and gunshots from not so far from where I was patrolling. Nothing stands out in the creepy / paranormal range for me, though some co-workers claim to have seen some crazy stuff. So this is my funniest encounter. One morning at 2 AM, on maybe my 3rd week of the job, I am walking from my apartment as I took a quick snack break from my office, which wasn't far. And at this time of night, I would usually be in the truck, patrolling, and not being in the truck was a mistake. Number 1. We were not classified as armed security guards, meaning no firearms, but we did carry an extendable baton, which in my state, you need to have a license to carry and use. I, being somewhat stupid, had mine anyway, although I was not licensed yet. My logic was, I would rather use it and get an assault charge than not have it and possibly get stabbed, which was very careless, I know. I am walking back, and I see what is pretty obviously a drunken man stumbling in my direction, shaking down the jitters, as this was my first real encounter. I go talk to the man to escort him off campus, which is generally no big deal, as 90% of the time The drunk people just want to get home and aren't looking for trouble. This guy apparently was. He immediately gets belligerent with me and starts screaming at me. I maintained my distance, but he began advancing on me, fists raised. On instinct, I grabbed the baton and extended it. Luckily for me, hitting him could have gotten me fired if not arrested. I realized I shouldn't swing it at him, and for some reason, I still don't exactly know why, I pointed the baton at him and yelled at the top of my lungs, "Expelliarmus." The belligerent drunk man stopped in his tracks, turned around, and walked off campus, and I never saw him again. I'm still waiting for my Hogwarts letter. Tenerife, Spain, 2001. I was new to the place, just a 19-year-old kid looking for his first adventure abroad. I worked 2 jobs to afford the rip-off rent I was paying. One at daytime, and the other was tending a crappy bar late at night. After a few weeks, I was exhausted at the end of every night shift. I stumbled home from work every night and woke almost as tired as I fell asleep. Closing times. The last notes of Semisonics played to death the last song of the evening finally fades, and the last drunk Brit staggers out of the door. The doorman, Nick, is stacking chairs and locking the furniture outside in place. I empty the last bin under the counter and walk out back. Heaps of trash by the back door / emergency exit. I'm annoyed because my co-workers were supposed to take that shit out, not just leave it in the kitchen. I lean against the wall, fish a pack of Luckies out of my rolled sleeve, and light one up. I drag deep. Once the last bars have closed, it's so quiet, and I can hear the tobacco burn. The burning tobacco, and that muffled thumping sound from the other side of the door. It's hard to describe, like someone snapping a dry twig underwater. What the hell? I hit the light switch inside the door. Of course, it doesn't work. It's only been broken for a week. I open the door, and someone says something outside. A split second later, something made of glass explodes against the door, right next to my head, and splatters me with some shit. In my face, my eyes, and all over my shirt. Great. Staggering back inside, wiping my face, and deliberately trying to get the glowing cigarette out of my shirt. How it ended up inside is something I wonder about to this day. Doorman Nick steps into the kitchen, wondering what the hell happened. He takes a look at me. "You okay, little buddy?" "Yeah, I think so. Some twat threw a bottle at me." "Sure you're okay? Looks like they got you pretty good." "What?" Nick pushes me into the kitchen washroom. Blood spattered all over my face and shirt. How the hell? I'm sure it didn't hit me. Surely a few shards of glass couldn't have cut me up that bad. And I hear Nick swear in the alley, and we step outside. There's a young guy lying beside the dumpster, skull caved in, with what the police concluded was a bottle of Yelston vodka that was flung at me as I opened the door. What I heard was the wet, muffled crack of a human skull caving in. I can still hear it in my mind to this day. My girlfriend and I moved into an apartment complex, a bunch of fourplex. Not too long after we moved in, we got our first dog. All was well for a few weeks. After about a month of having the dog, I was walking her outside, and a little kid walks up to us, around 7 years old, and he said his name was Owen, and he asks if he can pet the dog. Of course, I didn't think anything of it and said yes. And then he asks if he can hold her. I figured why not. Owen then picked up the dog, squeezed her as hard as he could, instantly causing the dog to squeal. I told him that was not okay, and that he shouldn't treat animals like that. I know this is not scary yet, but bear with me. A couple of days later, whilst I am home, I hear a knock at the door. It's Owen. He asks if the puppy can come out to play, and I tell him that she is sleeping, and then he asks for candy. We keep a bowl of candy on the coffee table in plain sight. I say sure, but make sure it's okay with his mother before he comes back. This happens 3 or 4 more times over the next few weeks. Around lunchtime one day, Owen shows up, and he asks for candy whilst holding up a yellow wiffle bat. I tell him that I'm all out of candy, and that he should go home, and he responds, "You best have candy when I'm back, or we are going to get you." He was alone. I closed the door and moved the bowl of candy to the next room out of sight. In about 15 minutes, I hear the door open and the storm door slam shut. Owen, without missing a beat, walks in, takes candy, as if he knew where I moved the bowl to, says nothing and then leaves. I chase him out and tell him not to come back and proceed to ask him where he lives. He points to his place, and I make a mental note to go down there at a later time with my wife, because she wears the pants in our relationship. When the missus gets home, we both walk down to the apartment that I watched Owen enter into, and no one's there. It's empty. According to the office, the unit had been empty for some time, and any tenant would only stay for a few months before breaking their contract. Over the next few weeks, the dog and cat go nuts. The dog would sit and growl at the corner behind the front door. For hours, she would watch the corner. The cat would go shit crazy if the doors were shut, scratching at them, shoving his face trying to get them open. About 2 months after the initial sighting of Owen, my wife and I are driving home late at about 11. About 2 months after the initial Owen sighting, my wife and I are driving home at about 11 p.m. So we turn the corner and Owen is there on a big wheel and stares right at us. He points at us and follows us with his finger as we turn around, park the car, and he's gone. Since then we have moved to a new location, but for the year that we lived in the apartment, the dog and the cat never stopped hating doors and corners. We often heard creaking doors and saw reflections in the windows. I'm getting goosebumps just remembering it. By far the creepiest experience I've ever had. I work in a shipping and receiving facility that was originally built as a military base and munitions factory and storage during World War II. One night, my partner and I were alone in the facility, just the two of us. He had a habit of sneaking off to sleep. I didn't care. There were only two of us, and if I really needed him, I could radio him, and he would come back. So, one night, he goes off to do his rounds. Here's where I should describe our office a little bit. The main doors and entryway connect to the electromagnet secured inner doors, and in between the two sits our office. There are windows on all 4 sides, so that we can see the employee parking lot, and then into the main corridor of the facility. Now on these shifts, we would sometimes watch TV on the computers. So that's what I did whilst my partner was out. Sitting there minding my own business, I turned around to watch the show on the computer behind me. and then turned around and looked out into the main corridor, and I saw what looked like a person standing in front of the window, but all I could see was the shoulder seam of a jacket and some kind of patch. I jumped, but thought it was my partner, except he never came through the doors. So after a minute I convinced myself that I was just tired, and went back to watching TV. After a few more minutes, I turned around, and there was the jacket in front of the window again. The patch faded away as I sat staring, and my partner didn't come back for another 30 minutes. There also was what we refer to as ghost traffic. There are cameras all over the inner and outer perimeter of the facility, so we can always see and usually hear if there are semi-trucks entering or leaving the facility. Sometimes we can hear a truck drive by our office, but we will never see one. They never pull up to the guard check outside the gate, and nothing is ever seen on camera. I had just finished my first year of university. I had taken up a position as a taxi dispatch with my boyfriend's cousin's taxi company. For the first week and a half, I worked mainly day shifts, until the owner decided to extend the hours to 24/7, and I was the lucky employee who would be covering 3 or 4 of these shifts a week. The next week, I was working my first night shift alone. The driver would be out all night looking for fares, which meant a lot of the night would be left to just me. I wasn't uneasy working such a shift by myself, since I had worked at a 24-hour coffee shop and was used to the midnight shifts. It was also a Wednesday or Thursday night, so it wasn't particularly busy. The best part about this job was that my boss let me use the internet to play games on my laptop in the office. From the computer desk in the office, I could see the front door, a portion of the front desk, and most of the front windows, so I could keep a close eye on what was happening outside. Plus, the bell above the door always alerted me to a new customer, so I wouldn't be caught off guard if I got too into my game. On this particular night, I was working with a taxi driver named Dave. Dave is around 6'3" and 300 pounds, plus he suffers from severe health problems, one of which made all his movements slow and painful. He definitely wasn't Mr. Fitness, or the type of person who would be able to defend themselves or others very easily. Sometime during the early hours of the morning, around 1:30 to 2, Dave gets a call to go pick up someone in a town 15 minutes away. He'd gathered up all his stuff and drove into the night whilst I headed the office and continued playing my video game. About 15 minutes later, I caught something over the top of my laptop, and my mind froze. I could hear panting, and in the reflection of the window, I could see someone sitting on one of the waiting chairs. I walked into the doorway that connects the front room with the office. I glanced into the sitting area and nearly shat bricks. Some guy with a massive rat tail had managed to ninja his way into the office and was now sitting in one of the chairs with his face buried in his hands, panting heavily. He was dirty, sweaty, and sounded like he'd just finished running a marathon. Now, the rat tail should have tipped me off, but I found it more hilarious than frightening. A few moments passed, and I finally got up the courage to ask him if he needed a cab. He didn't respond at first. I asked him again, and he looked up at me. I took a step back into the office. His face was scratched and covered in blood from the wound on the top of his head. I was shocked, and immediately offered assistance to him. He replies with, "I'm fine. I don't need help. I just want to go home." I asked him if he needed a cab, and if so, where he was going. He told me he lives about 20 minutes away and wants Dave to take him home. After that, shit started getting weird. I called over to Dave using the radio to tell him that there was a fair in the office and that he wanted a ride. He told me that he would be another 10 minutes. My hand was on the phone the entire time, in case this guy made any sudden movements. Instead of going back into the office, I decided it would be best to stay out front, where there are two great big bay windows that make it easy to see what is happening inside the taxi office. I didn't feel as though he was a threat though, but he seemed really angry at something, and I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, people would be able to see it. So I walked out into the front room, and as I get a closer look to the gentleman, that's when I see him. He's not just bleeding from the head, but from the shoulder and the knee. I ask him if he's okay, and then I offer to call him an ambulance. Bad idea. "You don't need to be doing that," he told me. "It ain't like I killed nobody, right? I never killed nobody. Don't go doing that. You don't need to call anyone. I just want to go home." "I'm sorry. I just noticed you're bleeding pretty badly and thought maybe you'd like someone to maybe make sure you're okay." "I didn't kill nobody. That arsehole should have kept his mouth shut. He got what was coming to him. He shouldn't have said those things. But it ain't like I killed nobody. You don't need to call nobody. I just want to go home." "Okay," I tell him. "But you're bleeding." "It ain't like I killed nobody," he replied. "I swear, I didn't kill nobody. Please don't call the cops. I don't need the cops. I just need to go home. I didn't kill anyone." There was silence for a few minutes. He notices the phone clutched in my hand. I fell down," he blurted out. "What?" "I fell," he replied. That's why I'm bleeding. I fell. It ain't like I killed nobody." But he got up and started pacing. He was growing impatient for his cab, and I was scared shitless. Blood was now on the chair and floor, and I had the phone in my hand, and every once in a while he broke the silence with another string of incoherent babbling about how he had done nothing wrong, because he hadn't killed anyone, and that I didn't need to call the cops because he was a good guy. Eventually, Dave radios over that he's about 2 minutes away, and I breathed a sigh of relief. He pulled up in front, and the man gets into the car, and they drove off. Now I'm worried for Dave, so I call the cops. I reported what happened, and they followed the taxi cab to this guy's house where they arrest him. Turns out, this guy had run away from a nearby bar after he had physically assaulted a fellow patron. To what extent, I never found out. He injured him with a sharp object, I assume a pocket knife or a needle, took off running, fell, and managed to find his way into the taxi office. During his time in the cab office, the police had been searching for him. So technically, no, he didn't kill anyone, but he did assault and attempt to kill someone. I also found out that one of the other drivers, Stephen, knew the guy from high school years ago. His name is Duke, explains the rat tail, and he has a history of violence. He also has a history of coming home drunk and cracking his wife's skull open from time to time. Whether he had planned to do that night, I couldn't say, but I'm just glad that the guy ended up in the drunk tank for the night. His wife was unharmed, and the guy who got stabbed didn't die. At least, I assume he didn't. I still see Duke now and again walking the streets with his glorious rat tail, which means he didn't get arrested. Regardless, the wait for Duke to be picked up was terrifying, and I hope we never have to meet again. Before my older sister was born, my parents travelled pretty extensively all over Europe and Africa and met a lot of people. Before this story started, we had 3 English dudes staying with us, 2 of whom were hooking up with each other whilst their wives and kids didn't know, and the other guy had ditched his job in England to come over here to hook up with a 19-year-old he met on Facebook. He was like 54, so pretty much my parents had a whole lot of interesting people staying at ours leading up to this event. This happened a couple of years ago, when I was around 13. My older sister Mary had gone and left for uni, so it was just me and my parents at home. We live on a farm, so our house is pretty big, and we were kind of ratting around in there. So my parents accepted a request from English dude number 1, sleeping with his friend behind his wife's back, to have his 23-year-old son called Justin come stay with us and do work around the farm and pay food and rent. I kind of stayed away from Justin because he smelt really strongly of cigarettes and cheap body spray. Around the same time Justin came to stay with us, my sister's 8-year-old Labrador developed a limp because Labradors have hip problems, and Milo had a history of really bad leg problems. We just kind of assumed she was about to head off, aka Dad didn't want to pay $3 grand for surgery, and my sister was called back home from uni to say goodbye before we put her down. Mary was devastated. Milo had been her 12th birthday present, and she was given to her just after our nana died, so she was really attached. Justin liked having my sister around too. He followed her around, offered to take her to clubs, and invited her to drink with him when he finished cheering or whatever. Mary was pretty flattered, because Justin was a nice enough guy, decent looking, and from what I remember he was also really charismatic. Anyway, she went out on a couple of dates with him, and Milo's limp cleared up. Mary went back to uni, and everything was sweet. But Justin called Mary like 9 times a week, and went to visit her unannounced, while she was out of town on a skiing trip, and that's a whole other story. And then the dog's limp came back around 3 months later, and what we didn't notice before, when she had the limp, was that Milo got really nervy around people. She already was pretty nervous around men, being a rescue pup before all of this happened, and then she started shaking when she got petted. Dad took this as a sign that the dog needed to be put to sleep, because she had a brain tumor. Okay, Dad. And Mary was called back down to say goodbye. This time, Mary was 100% focused on the dog, instead of Justin. I suppose it was real for her now, and she never left Milo's side in the week leading up to the vet's visit. On the night before, she decided that she wanted to sleep with the dog before it was put down. We all went to bed, and Mary headed down to the dog run that we had for Milo, with a shitload of blankets to sleep cuddled up next to the dog and hug it, so Milo would spend her last night in the arms of someone who she loved. It was a pretty big run for just one dog, because the people we bought the farm off bred spaniels, and the kennels the dog slept in were literally the same size, if not bigger than my bed. So Mary heads down to the kennel, and hears footsteps like someone was jogging down to the run. At this point it's around 10:30 at night and she gets pretty worried. So she went back up to the house and woke our dad up, and he went down to see what's going on. When they get down, there are no footsteps, but as they get closer they could both hear grunting. Dad assumes it was one of our neighbour's pigs who had gotten out and stuck in the run, which happened about 8 times a week. So he went in to shoe the pig and put it in the paddock so the neighbours could get it the next day. Mary followed him with the lantern so he could see the pig and they could shoo it out. They just got into the run, and there was Justin, with his pants around his ankles, kneeling, about to put his penis into our dog's ass. My dad was petrified in shock. and my older sister, who was quite small and delicate looking, charged forwards and hit Justin over the head so hard with the lantern that the lantern went out, and Justin's nose and cheek were pretty much shattered, and he had to be taken to the hospital, whilst his mum and dad, the secretly gay dad, came and screeched at the family for letting their baby get hurt. I was told Justin had to leave because his grandmother died, and the dog pretty quickly made a drastic recovery from her limp and her anxiety. He didn't have charges pressed against him, and my parents stopped bringing people to our home directly after that. Since I am at home now, because of my fibro disability, I've got a lot of time to tell my tale. Back in 2007, I started a tech job with an IP/phone/VoIP/DT1/long distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't know how they stayed in business as long as they did. It was really a pyramid scam, but thankfully, I was on the IT side of things, so I didn't have to sell anything. It was a small, typical tech support call center. The customers would call in, or Verizon/Quest etc. would call and say DT1 lines were down or outages. I was the only female on my team, having to prove myself and show that I could do just the same as my male counterparts could. It didn't take long, and the customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday to Saturday from 1 PM to 12 AM and an hour lunch after 6 PM. I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office by 6 PM was insane, and I couldn't blame them. But I decided that having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself for most of the night. I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure that I answered calls. It was a very slow shift. I would get a lot of time to play video games, read, do schoolwork, or just write. But sometimes, I would just wander the building, walk all around just to get away from my desk for a while. I would have the VoIP phone system connected to my cell phone, so I wouldn't miss any calls. This allowed me to get soda, go get food, and so on. One time, whilst I was up away from my desk, I was going down to the lunchroom to grab a soda. The vending machine was on the basement floor, and the basement had a wall of windows and one set of security doors, same for the main entrance. Only, there was one camera facing that door, nothing else to make you feel very safe. I didn't like going to the basement much, because the back of the building faced an acre of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason, they didn't install lights for the walking path. Never really sure why that was, but it really didn't help the creep factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times, I would feel like someone was watching me. I always tried my best to make it fast when getting a soda or snack, but sometimes I didn't feel fast enough. So one night, I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow, dragging night, and I needed a little caffeine for a pickup. I counted my money as I walked to make sure I had enough to get in and out quickly. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just blackness. I felt a bit of unease, and everything told me to turn on my heels and go back to my desk. It was 9 PM, and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this popsicle stand. I tried shaking the feeling off and briskly walked over to the soda machine to make my selection. The soda dropped down, and as I bent down to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand. I slowly turned around and was scared to see someone out there. But as I made the full turn, I saw once again nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back up to the main floor. I didn't bother with the elevator. I went up the stairs and ran up them. My heart was already racing for having to go down there in the first place, and then the loud bang, and now running up 2 flights of steps. Once I was back at my desk, I sunk down into my chair and tried to calm down. It was just one noise. I was in a building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over in my head that it was nothing. I was relieved by that, but out of nowhere, I got the feeling that someone was watching me again. I peeked up over my cubicle wall and looked around my office. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned face to face with the front of the building. Outside the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dirty male. He was cupping his hands around his eyes to try and see past the reflections of the light inside. I dropped back down in my cubicle before he caught sight of me. He didn't look like anyone had ever seen at the office, and it was a little past 9 p.m. There was no good reason he would be checking out my office. As I sit in my chair, I hear the doors shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull at the handles of the doors, and to my relief, they didn't budge. But as I watched him, he turned to face me. His face looked bruised or dirty. I couldn't tell which. Once his eyes were locked with mine, he started to bang harder and smacked the glass. I was so scared. It was the middle of the night. I was by myself and out in the middle of nowhere in this office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While the operator was getting on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass to the next. 911, what's your emergency? The lady's voice was direct. I'm working over at 42 on Mala Vista, and I need someone to come out now. There's a guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking with her, the guy disappeared from view. I tried to look in all directions, but I couldn't see him. I knew that he wouldn't just walk off, not with how hard he was banging. And out of nowhere, a good-sized rock came out of nowhere and smashed against the door. I screamed and went underneath my desk. The operator asked what happened, and I explained that a rock smashed against the glass door. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, but she told me to look in order to know where he was. I crawled out from under my desk and peeked over the wall and saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her to please have the police hurry. She said they were on their way. I have heard so many of these stories, and when they say that the cops couldn't get there fast enough, they aren't kidding. It feels like time is standing still, and you can do nothing. There was another smash against the door, but along with the sound of glass breaking, sirens could be heard coming towards my building. It was music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived and thanked her for all her support. I stood back up and looked over the cubicle wall, and the red and blue lights were flashing wildly. But the thing I didn't see was the man. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was laying on the inside of the entryway. One officer came to the front door, and others were out combing the area. I could see their flashlights moving around the parking lot. The first officer to come into the building and greet me was very kind. He had patience with me and let me explain what I saw. Soon, my boss arrived and checked on me and the damage. At some point, my husband was called, and I was told I would be escorted home by one of the officers. I took the next few days off and started to look for another job where I wouldn't be alone at night by myself. When I gave my statement, I explained to the officer that the person could be partnered with an ex-co-worker who was fired a few weeks prior for stealing and just not showing up. He knew when people came and went. He knew where they kept the cell phones that we were selling, not under lock and key, but under desk of the provisioner. From smartphones to Blackberries, when they were still worth buying, of course. I went to leave this job about a month later and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt safer, especially with security guard and cameras all over the building. Like I said before, the company is no longer around. It was bought up by another company, and they basically liquidated all the funds that were worth something. So dirty man who tried to break into the office, let's never meet again. I was home alone with my grandmother. I was her caretaker. She had a serious stroke a few months before that left her paralyzed on one side and unable to communicate verbally. It was Easter, and my mother and aunt had thrown a dinner and both gone out leaving a huge mess. It was about midnight by then, and I was bone tired and just started cleaning after putting my nana to bed. Now the past week or so, she'd been doing something new. Sometimes, when we put her to bed, she'd start screaming, just a few minutes after the lights had been put out. And when I'd go in, she'd be sobbing and pulling her hair in fear. Since she couldn't talk, I'd have to ask her lots of yes-no questions for her to nod at. But I was at a loss as how to guide the conversation. All she could indicate so far was through pointing that there was something up in the back upper corner of the room scaring her. No matter what I did, whether it would be reaching for a photograph that had some relation to her dead parents, or kissing a crucifix, nothing seemed to settle her. But tonight she was quiet, so I started on the living room, and I was straightening to put away the stack of towels that belonged in the kitchen. And then I heard voices, men's voices so clearly, I instantly assumed that with the remote, which I had just put away, I'd somehow turned on the TV in a dead-bolted room on the far side of the kitchen. So I picked it up and pressed power. Nothing. I walked a few steps closer to the bathroom, built off the kitchen in such an old house, and I had this pricking sensation. I used to get it a lot as a kid, but ignored it, and the voices somehow faded against the sound of the water pipes. Well, okay, I told myself. I was just overtired. I turned back for the towels, and when I came back, I saw it. These papers on the floor, that a moment before were on the table. I was confused. Maybe I was just tired. I placed them and went back to get some dishes. And as I passed the bathroom, I saw a small man in a hat dancing in there. By now I was bullshit, but damn if those dishes didn't need doing. So I shut the bathroom door and brought them in. TV cable on the kitchen floor from the dead-bolted room, right in the middle for me to see. I put it on the table and started scrubbing the dishes. No sir, I was just tired. No ghosts or demons here. I was humming to show how in control and unconcerned I was, scrubbing up to the last casserole dish, when I heard 3 loud knocks on the sink bottom. Like something was crouched in the cabinet underneath and rapping on it with its knuckles. I picked up the dish and dropped it experimentally to see if it would cause an echo. I'd just dropped it in a moment before. and there was silence. So I just went back to scrubbing, a little more subdued this time. The cabinet door then swung out, deliberately hitting my knees twice, with a little pause between both. Forget the dishes. I dropped that stupid thing, went back into the living room, and repeated the Lord's Prayer until the prickly feeling left all of a sudden. My Nana's room was on the far side of the living room, and I did not want that thing anywhere near her. She never screamed at night either. I used to work as the overnight transport officer at a halfway house. I was in no way a cop or even a real corrections officer, as it was a privately run facility. I was, generally speaking, pretty laid back for a job involving convicts. My duties were twofold. 1, drop off / pick up the clients in my big ass unmarked white Ecoliner van, and 2, pick up and take out for the staff. My convicts, the working ones at least, were pretty relaxed. They were all fairly large guys, and most of them worked construction / factory jobs, and worked out in the evenings. I got a lot of fun tales from those nights, and here's one of them. I used to work midnight until 8 as a driver at a halfway house, taking some soon-to-be ex-cons to work in the wee hours of the morning. One morning, I'm cruising down the highway, taking a full van to work. Some arsehat comes blazing up on the ramp, honking his horn and flashing his lights. The works. It being 5 AM, and me being fresh out of shits to give, I grudgingly yield and give him the finger. For that, he tailgates me 3 miles to my exit. The entire time, my load of cons are egging me on, trying to get me to tap the brakes, swerve and what have you. But I told them to calm down and wait and see how committed this fool was to his rage. Pretty committed, it turns out. He followed me to my exit, and when I stopped at the light, he got out of his car and started coming towards my van with a tire iron. So I rolled down my window, smiled the best customer service smile and said, "Sir, before you do whatever it is you think you're about to do with that thing, you should know that I have a dozen convicts in this van. My finger is on the lock switch, and they're just aching for me to let them off the chain for a few minutes." Right on cue, my cons will immediately start howling and barking like a pack of wild hounds, and Miss Road Rage leans out of their car and starts screaming at Mr. Road Rage to get back in, and he turns white as a sheet and leaped across his hood trying to flee. Looking back on it now, that guy would have probably ended up hospitalized if I unlocked the doors. Some of my passengers were in for assaults after all. Barking Convicts 1, Road Rage Man 0. When I was a child, I wanted to believe ghosts were real. I wanted to desperately prove that. For many years I tried, but to no avail. Until I turned 18. By then I did believe that some things couldn't be explained, and was slowly losing hope. But in an aviary that had lovebirds, cockatiels and budgies, equaling to about 500 in total, anyone who has dealt with small breeding parrots understands that some parents aren't good to their chicks and will abandon and abuse them. Of course, the parents were kept more as pets and were not allowed to breed, and so I would become the new mum. Take into consideration that feeding chicks is a lot like feeding a human baby. They want to be fed even at night, in 2 to 4 hour intervals. One night, I was laying in bed, and had said my pleasantries to my friends for the night. In my silence, I was recollecting some memories, and my silence broke. I heard an odd gurgling sound. I figured it was the little water bottle I kept for my little fledglings, and thought nothing much. Dead silence followed through the room, and I began to become a little alert from the oddness of it all. Again, the queer quietness was stolen. The sound was akin to gurgling or croaking, and I have no idea how to describe it really. It just made my body go into fight or flight mode, and my hair stood on end. Honestly, it sounds like a cliche reaction, but it's true. I looked around and saw nothing. I decided my next course of action was to ask if anything was in the room. My little birds squeaked tiredly back, but nothing was seen or heard. I decided to take the next step and slam my foot against the bed. To my horror, I felt a force shove against my bed 4 seconds later. I was astounded and in shock, and nothing happened after that. 2 weeks later, I was walking into the kitchen and went to the fridge. Before I opened the door, that same noise was heard not 2 inches from my face. I don't remember grabbing anything from the fridge, but I do remember walking back to my room calmly, where I noped for the rest of the night. A month later, in the middle of the day, I was talking to my friend on Skype, and the door to my bedroom started shaking violently, and I screamed at my brother to stop it. He yelled from the bedroom that it wasn't him, and I quickly opened the door. Nothing. How my fat-ass brother could silently run to the living room in a second is beyond me. I can't explain it. I'm pretty sure my friend pooped his pants on the other end, and I was happy that something happened in front of someone and that I couldn't explain it. I worked as a security guard in a YMCA as an 18-year-old kid. It was a bit of a joke job, as the hostel part of the building was being used as informal social housing for runoff from the prison or vulnerable people. The police would visit around 3 times a week and take people away who were causing problems, and there were many ex-cons or people on drugs. The rest of the building, gym, exercise hall and small canteen, were all closed up, and the lights turned out at night. My job was to work from 8 AM to 8 PM, checking these buildings every couple of hours, and also do a walkthrough of the hostel part to check nothing was up. There had been a spate of suicides just before I got there, and in the previous week I had to listen to a distraught brother for an hour on the phone as he begged me to check on his sibling who had threatened to kill himself several times. So anyway, I was on my walkthrough on the bottom floor. All the lights were off and everything was quiet. To access the bottom floor, I needed to take the elevator down to the basement level. It was an old good elevator, not for public use. I got down, did my walkthrough okay, and was on the corridor in sight of the elevator when it pinged and opened, even though I was alone and hadn't called it. It was covered in blood. When I got to it, there was blood all over the glass mirror, a little well of blood near the control panel, and blood over the keys. It looked like someone had been murdered. There was no body or tissue, just blood. Suitably freaked the hell out, I jumped in as quickly as I could and pinged it up to reception level. When I got out, I went straight to the front desk and informed them what I had seen. The guy was pretty unwilling to help out, but we agreed that we should call the police and ambulance. As we were discussing this, a different elevator pinged and opened right in front of us, and a guy who looked like a zombie walked out. His face and head was a big welt of blood, and he was on crutches. He looked very confused and then fell over in front of us. Basically, this was a very high drug addict. He tried to take the stairs up to his room to the hostel, fell over, cut his head right open, got concussed, got into the wrong elevator, pressed to go up a level. When he got there, he'd fallen on the control panel and sent him back down to the basement, which is where I'd seen it, and only after managing somehow to get out of the floor above, he'd been wandering around the place leaving a trail of blood in his wake, trying to find help. We called the ambulance, and I was severely freaked out. I'm not sure if he made it. There was a small door that led to an attic space in my bedroom when I was 11 years old, and it became habit that I would shut the door as I walked into my bedroom a couple of times a week. I didn't think anything of it. I just assumed my mother didn't close it all the way and that she left it. After a while, I made the mistake of joking with her when she made a comment about me not picking up after myself. I said something like, "Every night, I have to close the attic door behind you. How about you shut it all the way when you're done?" She then informed me that she hadn't been in the attic in months. I asked my brother, and his response was the same, as well as my father. So then I started to pay really close attention to it, making sure it was closed in the morning, checking it after school, checking after dinner, as well as when I was heading up to bed. And without fail, at some point, it would be open. After a couple of months of wandering, studying, and experimenting, I thought I'd see what happens if I just don't shut it. I opened the door before school and checked it after school. It was still open. I checked after dinner. Still open. Before bed, it was still open. Now I'm laying in bed with my mind going crazy with the open door across the room. So I decide to check it out. So I roll over and focus on the black space in the attic, only to see a face staring back at me. I bolt downstairs, wake my parents, and get ridiculed by my brother. We switch bedrooms. We ended up moving into a new house 6 months later, due to an expanding household, and my new physics teacher and his wife bought our house. I could have forgotten all about that event and chalked it up to me having an overactive imagination. But then my senior year, I discovered how awesome our physics teacher was. It became my favorite class by far, and he was my favorite teacher. At the end of my senior year, my friend and I took our VHS camcorder around town, doing mostly silly things, but then took it to my old house to see what they'd done with the place. We got a very fun tour, and I got to tell stories about all the projects my dad did that were still part of the house. Then the wife leads us upstairs to show us the sewing room. I ask jokingly, "Notice anything strange in this room?" And I kid you not, her face goes blank. On camera, she asks what I mean, and I try to shrug it off, but end up saying something about the attic door. She confirmed that every time she comes up to sew, the attic door is open. She then tells us that the second day of being in the house, her dog, a German Shepherd, had gone into the room but would not go back downstairs. He started barking and could not be consoled, and then jumped through the window, landing on the tin roof over the porch, and then running off. The dog did not come back until the next day, and has not stepped foot into the hallway that leads upstairs since. I had the initial thought that I could show my parents and brother the story I had filmed, but I just decided to let it be. I used to work in this place as staff for a non-profit, and one night the security guard called out, and I was the only person to take his place. Why this building stayed open until 10 PM, I don't know, because everyone went home at 7 PM. The building was big and old-fashioned, even though the company owned one side. All I had to do was sit at a desk, watch the cameras, and lock up once 10 PM came around, and wait for our truck driver to pick up some artwork. It's almost 10 PM, and the truck driver is on his way, and the old elevator starts to move. It's on the 5th floor, and it starts coming down. I'm freaked out, because no one is on the 5th floor. I saw the last person go home 2 hours ago, so I grab the baton and go upstairs to investigate. Since the elevator is in motion, I am terrified of it. As I'm going straight up to the 2nd floor, I hear footsteps that sound like high heels down the lobby. I rush back downstairs, thinking I've never locked the front door, but it's not open. The elevator door opened, and no one was inside. I thought it was maybe my boss messing with me, so I started to call out his name whilst walking up the stairs. No one was on the 2nd floor, so I continue up the stairs and hear the elevator move once again. It's on its way to the 5th floor. When I get to the 3rd floor, the creepiest of all of them, the elevator stops above, and I hear footsteps. I finally get to the 5th floor, and no one is there but some creepy statue at the end of the hall. I can't believe I even had the guts to close up the floor and leave. So I get past the 4th floor, and I'm back on the creepy 3rd floor, and I almost shit my pants at the sight of something moving from the corner of my eye. No big deal. It's probably a roach. Keep going. The truck driver will be here soon. Nope. I look again, and the outline of a skinny kid with messy hair runs by the door of the president's office at the end of the hall. Oh no. I didn't turn off the light, shit. And as I find some massive balls and pick them up, I move towards the president's office, and the elevator starts moving again, and there are footsteps in the staircase at the same time. I start to break down and want to cry right there in the hallway. I have no idea what to do, so I run into the meeting room and cower near the windows, because if I see that kid or something else in the building, I'm ready to jump. I hear the elevator doors open on my floor, and my name being called softly. Jasper. Jasper. I start screaming for it to leave me alone. The footsteps are getting closer to the meeting room. The door opens, and I don't look because I have my eyes closed. I grab the baton, and as soon as I swing, some force stops it. It's the truck driver. I was so relieved to see him that I collapsed in his arms and bawled for a good minute. He got me all cleaned up, helped me close up, and gave me a ride home. Right as we got down the street from the building, he turns to me and says, "You didn't know that place was haunted?" Jim, my boss, had been talking about Tommy for years. Turns out Tommy was a boy who died of pneumonia in that home in the early 1900s. When I looked at one of the historical books we had on the mansion, that skinny kid with shaggy hair was in it. Seriously, screw that place. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I love listening to the sound of rain, even though it doesn't really help much when recording. I find it so relaxing. And remember that if you enjoyed today's video, please consider dropping a like and leaving a comment, as it's a really great way to help support the channel and I appreciate it tremendously. And if you'd like to do something incredible to help support the channel further, feel free to visit my Patreon. You can find a link in the description as well as the links to my social media. And if you'd like your story read on my channel, you can submit it as a text post to my Reddit page or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.